The morning sun painted the rice fields of New Seoul in golden light. 8-year-old Kim Dae ran between the green stalks, chasing butterflies while his mother Lee Na called him for breakfast. His father Park Woo was already working in the fields, checking the crops that would feed their small farming community. New Seoul was a peaceful world. 3 million humans had made it their home over the past 50 years. They grew food, raised families, and lived quiet lives under the warm yellow sun. The children played in the streets. The old people sat on porches telling stories. It was the kind of place where neighbors helped each other and doors stayed unlocked at night. That peace ended when the Caltharian ships appeared in the sky. The ships were massive black shapes that blocked out the sun. They moved slowly over the cities and towns, casting dark shadows on everything below. The humans looked up and felt fear creep into their hearts. These were not friendly visitors. The Caltharian Empire ruled 17 star systems with an iron fist. They conquered worlds not for resources or territory, but for the simple pleasure of control. Every species they met became their slaves. Every world they found became their property. They had been expanding across the galaxy for 300 years. The humans of New Seoul tried to fight back. Their small defense force launched fighters and fired missiles at the invading ships, but the Caltharian vessels were too strong and too many. Within 6 hours, every human military base was destroyed. The government building was in ruins. The spaceport was a crater. Governor Kim Tae sent a surrender message to the Caltharian fleet. He hoped to save civilian lives by giving up quickly. The Caltharian commander accepted the surrender with cold laughter. The occupation began immediately. Caltharian soldiers marched through every city and town. They wore black armor that covered them completely. No human had ever seen a Caltharian face. The soldiers spoke in harsh, grinding voices through their helmet speakers. The Caltharians had rules for conquered worlds. All weapons must be turned in. All communication devices must be registered. All gatherings of more than 5 people were forbidden. Anyone who broke these rules would be punished severely, but the harshest rule was yet to come. On the 3rd day after the conquest, Caltharian soldiers surrounded the small farming village where Kim Dae lived with his parents. They went door to door looking at every family. The soldiers carried scanning devices that beeped and flashed as they examined each person. Park Woo held his wife's hand tightly as the soldiers approached their home. Lee Na pulled Kim Dae close to her chest. The boy was scared but tried to be brave for his parents. The lead soldier stopped in front of their door. His scanner beeped loudly when he pointed it at Kim Dae. The soldier nodded to his companions and spoke into his communication device in the Caltharian language. "This one," the soldier said in broken human speech. "We take this one." Park Woo stepped forward. "Please, he is just a child. Take me instead." The soldier struck Park Woo with his weapon, sending the man to the ground. "You do not speak unless we ask you to speak." 2 soldiers grabbed Kim Dae by his arms. The boy looked back at his parents with wide, frightened eyes. "Mama, Papa, where are they taking me?" Lee Na tried to run after her son, but another soldier blocked her path. She fell to her knees sobbing. Park Woo struggled to get up, but the soldiers were already carrying Kim Dae away. The Caltharians had a tradition that they followed on every world they conquered. They would choose one innocent person from the local population and execute them publicly. This execution would be broadcast to all the other worlds under Caltharian control. It was meant to show everyone what happened to those who might think about resisting. Kim Dae was taken to the capital city of New Seoul. The Caltharians had built a platform in the main square, surrounded by cameras and broadcasting equipment. Thousands of humans were forced to watch. Millions more across 17 star systems would see it on their screens. The boy stood on the platform in his simple farm clothes. He was small and frightened, but he did not cry. The Caltharian executioner raised his weapon while the cameras recorded everything. "Any last words?" the executioner asked through his helmet speaker. Kim Dae looked directly into the camera. His voice was clear and steady despite his fear. "I want to go home to my mama and papa. I want to help them in the rice fields again." He said these words in Korean, the language his grandparents had taught him. The translation appeared on screens across the galaxy, but somehow the original Korean words carried more power. They spoke of simple love, of family, of the basic human desire for home and safety. The execution was swift. Kim Dae fell without another sound. The cameras kept recording as his small body lay still on the platform. The broadcast ended. The Caltharians packed up their equipment and left the square. They had accomplished their goal. Fear would now keep the conquered populations in line. But something unexpected happened as the broadcast ended. In hidden ships scattered across Caltharian space, human survivors watched their screens with growing rage. These were not ordinary civilians. They were soldiers from the Human Defense Corps, scattered and broken after the fall of Earth and the core human worlds. Captain Han Sol sat in the cramped bridge of his refugee transport ship. He had been leading civilians away from New Sol when the planet fell. Now he stared at the black screen where Kim Dae had just died. Beside him, Lieutenant Commander Yoon-ji clenched her fists so hard her knuckles turned white. "They killed a child," she whispered. "They killed a child and put it on every screen in the galaxy." Sergeant Major Kang Bo stood at the back of the bridge. He was a big man who had fought in dozens of battles, but tears ran down his face as he looked at the empty screen. "Sir," Yoon-ji said to Hansel, "we have to do something." Hansel was quiet for a long moment. Around the bridge, other human refugees sat in stunned silence. They had all just watched something that could never be forgiven or forgotten. "Contact every human unit you can reach," Hansel finally said. His voice was calm, but there was something hard as steel underneath it. "Send them the recording. Tell them what we just saw." "What message should we send with it?" Kang Bo asked. Hansel looked at the screen one more time. In his mind, he could still see Kim Dae's face, still hear his words about wanting to go home. "Tell them a child asked to go home to help his parents in the rice fields," Hansel said. "Tell them the Caltharians answered with murder. Tell them we have 8 minutes of footage that ends with a dead boy." He stood up and walked to the communication station. "And tell them that in 8 minutes we start our reply." The message went out across the dark spaces between stars, carried by hidden transmitters and secret networks. It reached human survivors on dozens of worlds. It found scattered military units that had been running and hiding since their defeat. But most importantly, it found people like Commander Oh Sung, who had been thought dead after the fall of Terra Station. It found Engineer Choi Min, who had been building weapons in secret asteroid bases. It found Dr. Shin Ae, who had been developing new technologies in hidden laboratories. The Caltharians had made a terrible mistake. They thought that showing the death of one innocent child would make the humans more afraid. Instead, they had given every human in the galaxy the same powerful memory, the same burning purpose. Kim Dae's death would not be in vain. His final words about home and family would echo across the stars until justice was done. The 8 minutes of that broadcast were ending, but for the Caltharian Empire, 8 minutes of reckoning were about to begin. The message spread faster than the Caltharians thought possible. Within hours of Kim Dae's death, secret networks across 17 star systems were buzzing with activity. Human survivors who had been hiding in shadow suddenly found each other again. Captain Han Sol's transport ship became the first meeting point. Lieutenant Commander Yoon-ji worked at the communication station day and night, sending coded messages to anyone who would listen. The responses came back quickly. "This is Commander Oh Sung. I thought I was the only one left from Terra Station. I have 12 ships and 300 soldiers. Engineer Choi Min here. I've been building weapons in the asteroid belt. I have enough supplies to arm a small army." Dr. Shin-Ae reporting. "My research team has been working on new technology. We have things the Caltharians have never seen." Each message brought new hope. The humans were not as broken as they had believed. They were scattered, yes, but they were still alive. They were still fighting, but the real surprise came from an unexpected source. The civilian populations on occupied worlds were also responding to the broadcast. These were not soldiers or rebels. They were ordinary people who had been trying to survive under Caltharian rule. Shopkeeper Bae, Jun owned a small store on the world of New Busan. He had been selling goods to Caltharian soldiers and their collaborators, trying to feed his family. But after seeing Kim Dae die, he made a different choice. He started hoarding medical supplies, food, and communication devices. When human resistance fighters contacted him, he was ready to help. Teacher Im Soo had been forced to teach Caltharian propaganda to human children on New Daegu. She hated every word she had to speak, but she needed the job to survive. After the broadcast, she began teaching the children secret lessons. She showed them how to recognize coded messages and how to pass information without being caught. Even the children became part of the growing network. 10-year-old Park Min started carrying messages between resistance cells on New Incheon. The Caltharian soldiers ignored him because he was just a child playing in the streets. They did not know he was memorizing their patrol routes and reporting their movements to the underground. The Caltharians noticed the increased activity, but they did not understand what it meant. They saw small acts of defiance and called it terrorism. They saw supply shortages and blamed incompetent local administrators. They saw communication problems and thought their equipment needed repair. Commander Vrak of the Caltharian Third Fleet filed his daily report to the High Command. Minor unrest continues on several worlds. Nothing beyond normal post-conquest adjustment. The execution broadcast appears to have had the desired effect. He was completely wrong. In hidden bases throughout Caltharian space, humans were gathering. Commander Oh-sung's ship docked with an abandoned mining station in the Kepler system. Captain Han-sol's transport arrived hours later. Soon, 12 different ships were connected to the station, creating a floating city in the darkness between stars. The reunion was emotional but brief. These people had been fighting alone for months, believing they were the last hope for humanity. Now they discovered they were part of something much larger. "How many people do we have?" Han-sol asked during their first meeting. Commander Oh-sung consulted his datapad. 1,500 trained soldiers. About 3,000 civilians with useful skills. Maybe 10,000 more in the general population who can help us. "What about weapons and ships?" Lieutenant Commander Yoon-ji asked. Engineer Choi Min smiled for the first time in months. "I've been busy. I have enough guns to arm 5,000 people. Plus some surprises the Caltharians won't expect." Dr. Shin-ae stepped forward. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and quick hands. "My team has developed new shield technology and improved engines. We can make our ships faster and harder to hit." The planning began immediately, but this was not like the desperate raids they had been conducting before. This was organized, systematic, and patient. The humans had learned hard lessons from their earlier defeats. Captain Li Huan had been leading hit-and-run attacks against Caltharian supply convoys. He was good at striking fast and disappearing, but his victories were small and temporary. Now he was part of something bigger. "We need to think long-term," Commander Oh-sung explained to the group. "Random attacks won't free our worlds. We need a real strategy." The strategy that emerged was brilliant in its simplicity. The humans would not try to match Caltharian military strength. Instead, they would attack the systems that kept the Empire running. Power grids, communication networks, supply lines, and administrative centers would be their targets, but they would follow strict rules. No civilian casualties. No destruction of infrastructure that people needed to live. No revenge attacks on innocent Caltharians. This was about justice, not massacre. The plan had another important element. The humans would not fight alone. They would reach out to other species under Caltharian rule and offer them hope. The Jirani had been conquered 50 years ago. They were a peaceful people who had never developed strong military technology. The Caltharians used them as laborers in dangerous mining operations. The Vorth were former warriors whose worlds had been stripped of all weapons. They were forced to work in factories, building equipment for their conquerors. The Zalani were merchants whose trade networks had been destroyed. They were now servants in Caltharian government buildings. All of these species had reasons to hate their oppressors. They just needed someone to show them that resistance was possible. The humans began reaching out carefully. They sent messages to Jirani mining camps offering weapons and training. They contacted Vorth factory workers, promising freedom for their families. They approached Zalani servants asking them to gather information about Caltharian military plans. The response was immediate and overwhelming. These species had been waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. Jirani worker Kels had lost his son in a mining accident that the Caltharians had ignored. When human agents offered him a weapon and a chance for revenge, he didn't hesitate. Vorth female Nara had watched her people's proud warrior culture slowly die under occupation. She began secretly training other Vorth in combat techniques their grandparents had used. Zalani merchant Quan had access to Caltharian government buildings. He started copying files and passing information to the Human Resistance Network. Within weeks, the rebellion had spread to 6 different species across dozens of worlds. The Caltharians still thought they were dealing with scattered human terrorists. They had no idea they were facing a coordinated uprising that included half their subject populations. The humans coordinated everything from their hidden base. They provided weapons, training, intelligence, and most importantly, hope. They showed the other species that the Caltharian Empire could be defeated, but they also made it clear that this was not about replacing one empire with another. When victory came, each world would be free to govern itself. The humans wanted allies, not subjects. This promise was revolutionary. No conquering force in galactic history had ever offered genuine freedom to the people they liberated. The other species began to believe that the humans were different. As the weeks passed, the network grew stronger. Supply caches were hidden on dozens of worlds. Communication lines connected resistance cells across light years of space. Training camps prepared fighters for the battles to come. The Caltharians remained confident. Their military was still strong. Their technology was still superior. Their empire still controlled 17 star systems. But empires built on fear have a fatal weakness. When that fear disappears, everything falls apart very quickly. The humans were about to teach the Caltharians this lesson. Kim Day's death had lit a fire that was spreading across the galaxy. Soon that fire would consume everything the Caltharian Empire had built. The gathering storm was almost ready to strike. The first attack came exactly 3 weeks after Kim Day's death. It was not dramatic or violent. The people of New Busan simply woke up to find their city in darkness. Every power plant had stopped working at exactly the same time. Caltharian engineers rushed to fix the problem. They found nothing wrong with the equipment. The power plants were undamaged and fully functional, but somehow every control system had been reprogrammed. The plants would not start until someone entered a very specific code sequence. The Caltharians did not have the codes. "Terrorist attack," declared Colonel Thek, the military governor of New Busan. "Find the saboteurs and execute them publicly." His soldiers searched every building and questioned every human they could find. They found nothing. The people seemed as confused as the Caltharians about what had happened. What the soldiers did not know was that shopkeeper Bai Jun had been preparing for this moment for weeks. He had hidden emergency power cells in his store, along with communication devices and medical supplies. When the official power grid failed, the human resistance network switched to backup systems. The blackout lasted for 3 days. The Caltharians eventually brought in mobile generators to restore basic services, but the message had been sent clearly. The humans could strike anywhere, anytime, and the mighty Caltharian military could not stop them. This was just the beginning. On New Daegu, the planetary communication network suddenly stopped working. Messages that should have taken seconds to transmit now took hours or never arrived at all. The Caltharian administrators could not talk to their commanders in orbit. The orbital fleet could not coordinate with ground forces. Teacher Imsu smiled as she watched Caltharian technicians running around in confusion. Her students had been very helpful in planting the communication viruses. Children could go places that adults could not, and no one suspected them of sabotage. On New Incheon, the main supply depot exploded in the middle of the night, but it was a very strange explosion. The building was completely destroyed, but no one was hurt. The blast happened exactly when the depot was empty, and the explosion was carefully controlled to avoid damaging nearby civilian homes. Young Park Min had provided the timing information. He knew exactly when the Caltharian guards changed shifts and when the building would be unoccupied. The pattern continued across a dozen worlds. Infrastructure failed, supply lines broke, and communication systems went dark. But civilian casualties were always zero. The humans were surgically removing the supports that held up Caltharian power, while being careful not to hurt innocent people. Captain Li Huan coordinated the military strikes from his hidden command ship. His teams were small and fast, hitting their targets and disappearing before the enemy could respond. But every attack served a larger purpose in the overall strategy. "Target the ammunition depot on Kepler 7, he ordered his strike team leader. "But wait until the night shift. The day workers are all Jirani civilians." "Understood, sir." "What about the Caltharian guards?" "Disable their communication first, then hit them with stun weapons. We want them unconscious, not dead." This approach confused the Caltharians. They were used to rebellions that tried to kill as many of their people as possible. They understood revenge and hatred, but the human attacks seemed designed to cause maximum disruption with minimum bloodshed. Commander Oh-sung explained the strategy to his officers during a planning meeting. "We are not trying to become the new oppressors. We are trying to show everyone that there is a better way to solve problems. The other species under Caltharian rule were watching carefully. They had expected the humans to be just another group of violent rebels. Instead, they saw something they had never encountered before. Warriors who fought with both strength and morality. Jirani worker Kels had been skeptical when the humans first contacted him. His people had tried rebellion before, and it had always ended in brutal reprisals against civilian populations. But the human approach was different. They gave us weapons, but they also gave us rules, he told his fellow workers. No killing unless absolutely necessary. No harming civilians of any species. No destroying things that people need to live. The rules were not just empty words. Human advisors worked alongside Jirani fighters to make sure the guidelines were followed. When young Jirani Hothead Dren wanted to bomb a Caltharian residential building, the humans stopped him. That will not help our cause, explained Human Sergeant Kimbo. It will only make the Caltharians more angry and more likely to hurt your people. But they killed my family, Dren protested. I understand your anger, Kimbo replied. My people have also lost family members. But revenge that hurts innocent people is not justice. It is just more cruelty. This philosophy was spreading throughout the rebellion. Borth warrior Nara had been training her people to fight like their ancestors did centuries ago. But she also taught them the human concept of proportional response. Strike hard enough to win, but not hard enough to become the monsters we are fighting, she told her trainees. Zalani Merchant Kwan was amazed by the intelligence network the humans had built. They seemed to know everything that happened in Caltharian government buildings, sometimes before the officials themselves knew about it. How do you get such good information? He asked Human Intelligence Officer Lieutenant Park Soo. We listen, Park Soo answered, but we also analyze. We look for patterns. We predict what the enemy will do before they do it. The Caltharians were indeed becoming predictable. Their responses to each attack followed the same pattern. First, they would increase security. Then they would question suspected rebels. Finally, they would make threats against the civilian population. But none of these measures worked against the human strategy. Increased security could not stop attacks that came from inside their own systems. Questioning suspects was useless when the real rebels were hidden among loyal-seeming citizens. And threatening civilians only made more people angry and willing to help the resistance. Dr. Shinei's technical innovations were also making a difference. Her team had developed new types of computer viruses that could hide inside normal system operations for weeks before activating. They had created communication scramblers that could block Caltharian signals without affecting civilian networks. They had even built special weapons that could disable Caltharian armor without killing the soldiers inside. The goal is to make their technology work against them, she explained to Engineer Choi. And we cannot build better weapons than they have, but we can make their weapons useless. The psychological effect of the attacks was enormous. Caltharian soldiers started to feel like they were fighting ghosts. They would arrive at a target to find it already destroyed. They would set up defenses only to discover that the rebels had somehow gotten past them. They would try to communicate with their commanders only to find their radios filled with static. Some Caltharian units began to lose confidence. They had been told that humans were weak and easily frightened. But these humans seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The rebellion was also attracting attention from species that had not yet been conquered by the Caltharians. The Altani Confederation controlled 5 star systems near the border of Caltharian space. They had been preparing for an eventual invasion, knowing that the Empire would come for them eventually. Now they sent secret messages to the human resistance. We have ships and weapons. If you can keep the Caltharians busy with internal problems, we can hit them from outside. Similar offers came from other independent governments. The galactic balance of power was starting to shift. The Caltharian Empire was no longer seen as unstoppable, but the humans knew that scattered attacks and small victories would not be enough. They needed something bigger, something that would shake the Empire to its foundations. Commander Oh-sung called a meeting of all resistance leaders. Representatives from 6 different species gathered in the hidden base between the stars. We have proven that the Caltharians can be hurt, he told the group. Now we need to prove that they can be defeated. The plan that emerged from that meeting was audacious beyond anything they had attempted before. It would require perfect coordination across dozens of worlds. It would need split-second timing and flawless execution. If it failed, the rebellion would be crushed completely. But if it succeeded, The Caltharian Empire would learn what humans really meant when they talked about justice. The final preparations began immediately. Weapons were distributed. Communication codes were updated. Strike teams moved into position on 17 different worlds. Everything was ready. The storm that had been gathering for weeks was about to break with the fury of 1,000 suns. Kim Dae's death would be avenged, not with mindless violence, but with precise, overwhelming justice that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. 7 minutes after Kim Dae had died on that terrible day, something remarkable happened on the world of New Gwangju. The massive Caltharian fortress that had controlled the planet for 3 years simply went dark. Colonel Kim Wan led the assault with surgical precision. His strike teams had been positioned for weeks, studying guard rotations and security systems. When the attack began, it was not with bombs or missiles, but with silence and shadows. The fortress communication array was the first target. Human infiltrators led by Major Yang Su had been working inside the base for months, disguised as maintenance workers and supply deliveries. They knew exactly where every cable was located and which systems controlled what functions. At exactly 7 minutes past the hour, every communication device in the fortress stopped working. The Caltharian soldiers found themselves cut off from their commanders and unable to coordinate their defense. The next phase came 60 seconds later. The fortress power grid failed in a cascade of darkness. But this was not like the simple blackouts on other worlds. This was a complete shutdown of every electronic system in the facility. Emergency lighting failed. Door controls stopped working. Weapons systems went offline. The mighty fortress became a collection of metal boxes filled with confused and frightened soldiers. Then the human forces struck. They came from every direction at once, moving through the fortress like they owned it. But their advance was careful and controlled. Caltharian soldiers who surrendered were taken prisoner. Those who fought back were hit with stun weapons that left them unconscious but alive. The battle for the fortress lasted exactly 43 minutes. When it was over, the Caltharians had lost their most important stronghold on New Gwangju, and not a single person on either side had been killed. But the humans did not celebrate their victory privately. Instead, they did something that shocked everyone watching. They broadcast their own message. The transmission went out on all frequencies to every world in Caltharian space. It showed the captured fortress and the human forces that now controlled it. But the camera also showed Caltharian prisoners being treated well, given medical care, and allowed to contact their families. Colonel Kim Wan stood before the camera in his simple military uniform. He was not a tall or impressive man, but his words carried enormous weight. "People of the galaxy," he began in clear, steady voice, "we are humans. Our children have been murdered. Our worlds have been conquered. Our families have been enslaved." The camera showed images from the broadcast of Kim Dae's execution. The boy's final words echoed across the transmission in dozens of languages. "But we do not fight for revenge," Kim Wan continued. "We fight for justice. We fight for freedom. We fight so that no child of any species will ever again die for the entertainment of tyrants." The message was simple and powerful. "We are coming for you. Not for conquest, but for liberation. Stand with us and we will stand with you." The effect was immediate and electric. On the world of New Daejeon, Caltharian Garrison Commander Vex was reviewing security reports when his communication officer burst into the room. "Sir, we are receiving surrender requests from 6 different resistance cells. They want to turn themselves in." Vex was puzzled. Surrender requests? Why would they give up now when they seemed to be winning? What Vex did not understand was that these were not surrender requests. They were recruitment messages. The human broadcast had inspired thousands of people who had been hiding their opposition to Caltharian rule. Now they were coming forward to join the fight. Jarani worker Kels watched the broadcast with tears in his eyes. For the first time since his son's death, he felt hope. The humans had proven that the Caltharians could be defeated without becoming monsters themselves. He turned to his fellow workers in the mining camp. "Who wants to be free?" Every hand in the room went up. Similar scenes played out on world after world. The human message was being translated into every language and shared through every available network. People who had never heard of humans before were learning about the rebellion that fought with both strength and morality. Fourth warrior Nara gathered her secret. Trainees in the abandoned factory where they had been practicing combat techniques. The broadcast had given them something more valuable than weapons or tactics. It had given them a cause worth fighting for. The humans have shown us the way, she told her people. Now we must follow it. Zelani merchant Quan was in the middle of copying Caltharian military files when the broadcast reached his hidden communication device. He stopped his work and watched the entire message twice. Then he began typing frantically. He was not just copying files anymore. He was actively sabotaging Caltharian operations. Every order he processed was subtly changed. Every supply request was delayed. Every communication was routed through systems that the rebels could monitor. The rebellion was no longer just about humans fighting Caltharians. It had become something much larger and more dangerous for the Empire. On 6 different worlds, full-scale uprisings began within hours of the broadcast. The Caltharian forces found themselves fighting not just human soldiers, but entire populations that had suddenly decided they would rather die free than live as slaves. But these new rebels followed the human model. They targeted military installations and government buildings, but they protected civilian areas. They captured Caltharian soldiers when possible, and treated prisoners according to the rules of war. They fought with discipline and purpose. Instead of blind rage, the Caltharian High Command was meeting in emergency session on their homeworld of Calthar. Prime. The Great Chamber was filled with worried voices and urgent reports. 17 separate incidents in the last 6 hours, reported Intelligence Director Morg. The humans seem to have coordinated a galaxy-wide offensive. How is that possible? Demanded Supreme Commander Zhek. Our intelligence showed they had maybe 2,000 fighters scattered across a dozen worlds. Our intelligence was wrong, Morg admitted. They appear to have recruited significant numbers from our subject populations. Fleet Admiral Crone studied the tactical displays showing rebel activity across Caltharian space. These attacks are not random. They are following a carefully planned strategy designed to maximize our losses while minimizing their own. What do you recommend? Asked Supreme Commander Zhek. Full military response, Crone answered immediately. Crush the rebellions with overwhelming force. Execute prisoners publicly. Destroy cities if necessary. Show them the price of defying the Empire. But Intelligence Director Morg was shaking his head. That strategy will not work against these rebels. They have already shown they can turn our brutality against us. Every civilian we kill will create 10 new rebels. Then what do you suggest? Zhek asked impatiently. Morg was quiet for a moment. I suggest we consider the possibility that we are dealing with something we have never encountered before. An enemy that fights for principles instead of territory. An enemy that sees war as a last resort instead of a first choice. You sound like you admire them, Crone said with disgust. I am trying to understand them, Morg replied. And what I understand is that they will not stop until they achieve their goals. They will not be frightened into submission. They will not be bought with promises of better treatment. They will fight until every world in our empire is free or until they are all dead. Then we will kill them all, Zhek declared. But even as he spoke these words, Zhek knew they were empty threats. The rebels were not fighting in open battles where superior Caltharian firepower could destroy them. They were fighting in shadows, in computer networks, in the hearts and minds of the subject populations, and they were winning. The broadcast continued throughout the day. Each successful rebel operation was recorded and transmitted across the galaxy. People saw Caltharian bases falling, supply depots being captured, and government officials fleeing their posts. But they also saw something else. They saw rebel fighters helping injured Caltharian soldiers. They saw prisoners being fed and sheltered. They saw conquered populations being offered genuine freedom instead of just a change of masters. The human revolution was not just military. It was moral, and that made it impossible to defeat with conventional weapons. By the end of the day, the Caltharian Empire had lost effective control of 4 complete star systems. Rebel forces held major installations on 12 more worlds. Most importantly, the subject populations were no longer passive victims. They had become active participants in their own liberation. The domino effect had begun. Each successful rebellion inspired 3 more. Each act of human mercy converted former enemies into allies. Each demonstration of moral strength proved that there was a better way to organize galactic civilization. Kim Dae's death had started something that could not be stopped. The 8-year-old boy who had asked to go home to help in the rice fields had become the symbol of a revolution that would reshape the galaxy. The Caltharians had 7 minutes and counting before their empire began to fall apart completely. The clocks on 1,000 worlds showed the exact moment, 8 minutes after the original broadcast timestamp when Kim Day had died. At that precise second, the impossible happened across 17 star systems simultaneously. Admiral Nam Ki stood on the bridge of the human battleship Justice, watching as enemy vessels appeared on his tactical display. But these were not Caltharian ships coming to attack him. These were Caltharian ships trying to flee the battles erupting on every world they had once controlled. All units, this is Admiral Nam Ki. He broadcast to the combined fleet surrounding him. Operation Final Justice is now active. Remember our rules. Disable, don't destroy. Capture, don't kill. We are liberators, not conquerors. The fleet that followed him into battle was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships flew alongside Jirani mining vessels that had been converted into fighters. Vorth transport craft carried boarding parties of former slaves. Zilani merchant ships had been modified with weapons and shields. But the most remarkable thing about this fleet was not its size or diversity. It was the fact that it was fighting for something greater than survival or revenge. On the surface of Calthar Prime, General Ryuda led ground forces through the capital city. Her soldiers moved with precision and purpose, but they also carried medical supplies and food for civilian populations. Even as they fought to overthrow the government, they were prepared to help the people who would be left behind. The Caltharian defenders had expected a brutal assault that would level the city and massacre the population. Instead, they found themselves facing an army that seemed more interested in protecting civilians than in killing enemies. "Surrender your weapons and you will not be harmed," General Ryu Da announced through loudspeakers as her forces advanced. "We are here to end the Empire, not to hurt its people." Many Caltharian soldiers threw down their guns and raised their hands. They had been told that humans were savage monsters who showed no mercy. But the reality was completely different from the propaganda. The real shock came when the human forces reached the government center. Instead of storming the building with guns blazing, they set up medical stations and began treating wounded Caltharian civilians who had been caught in the crossfire. Captain Shinho was a medic who worked alongside the combat troops. He found himself bandaging the wounds of a Caltharian child who had been hurt when a government building collapsed. "Why are you helping us?" the child's mother asked in broken human language. "We are your enemies." "You are not our enemy," Captain Shinho replied gently. "Your government was our enemy. You are just people who want to live in peace, just like we do." This scene was repeated in 100 different places as the battle for the capital continued. Human soldiers shared their food with hungry Caltharian families. Human engineers worked to restore power to civilian areas that had lost electricity. Human doctors treated anyone who needed medical care regardless of their species. But the most important battle was not happening in the streets or in space. It was happening in the hearts and minds of the Caltharian people themselves. The Empire had been built on the idea that the Caltharian species was superior to all others. The government had taught its people that conquest and domination were natural and necessary. The military had convinced its soldiers that mercy was weakness and cruelty was strength. Now those beliefs were crumbling under the weight of human actions. Commander Vex had been defending a military base on the outskirts of the capital when human forces surrounded his position. He had expected a siege that would end with everyone inside the base being killed or captured. Instead, the humans had sent a negotiator. "Commander Vex," said the human officer who approached under a flag of truce. "I am Colonel Park Jun. We would like to discuss the terms of your surrender." "There will be no surrender," Vex replied automatically. "Caltharian warriors fight to the death." "That would be wasteful," Colonel Park Jun said calmly. "Your soldiers are brave, but they are not responsible for the crimes of their government. Why should they die for the mistakes of their leaders?" Vex was confused. "You would let my soldiers live?" "Of course. They are soldiers doing their duty just as we are. When this war is over, the galaxy will need good people to help rebuild what was destroyed. Your soldiers could be part of that future." This conversation was happening all over the planet. Human commanders were offering Caltharian forces the chance to surrender with honor, instead of dying pointlessly. Many chose to lay down their weapons and join the effort to create a better galaxy. But the rebellion was not just about military victory. It was about moral transformation. The news networks that had once broadcast Caltharian propaganda were now showing images of human mercy and kindness. Citizens who had been taught to hate aliens were seeing those same aliens risking their lives to save Caltharian civilians. Factory worker Gek had spent his entire life building weapons for the Empire. He had believed that the Caltharians were destined to rule the galaxy because they were stronger and smarter than other species, but now he was watching human engineers working alongside Jirani technicians and Vorth mechanics to repair the power plant that supplied electricity to his neighborhood. They were not conquering his world. They were fixing it. Maybe we were wrong about a lot of things, he said to his wife as they watched the mixed species repair crews working. Together, similar conversations were taking place in millions of homes across Caltharian space. The Empire was not just losing territory and military assets. It was losing the support of its own people. The space battle around Calthar Prime was ending as well. Most of the Caltharian fleet had surrendered, rather than fight to the death against an enemy that offered fair treatment to prisoners. The few ships that tried to escape were allowed to go. The humans were not interested in hunting down every last enemy vessel. Let them run, Admiral Namki ordered when his officers asked for permission to pursue the fleeing ships. They can spread the word about what really happened here. Truth will do more damage to the Empire than any weapon we could use. By the time the sun set on Calthar Prime, the government that had ruled 17 star systems with an iron fist had simply ceased to exist. Some officials had fled to other worlds. Others had surrendered and were being held for trial. Many had joined the rebellion themselves, bringing valuable information about other Caltharian strongholds. But the real victory was not military. It was the fact that an entire civilization had been shown a better way to live. The broadcasts that went out from the conquered capital were very different from the execution footage that had started this war. These showed Caltharian children playing with human soldiers. They showed mixed species work crews rebuilding damaged buildings. They showed former enemies sharing meals and stories. Most importantly, they showed the memorial service that was held for Kim Day in the same square where he had been executed. Thousands of people attended, representing dozens of species. Park Woo and Lee Na, the boy's parents, traveled from New Seoul to speak at the ceremony. Their words were simple but powerful. Our son died because cruel people thought that fear was stronger than love, Park Woo said. Today we learned that they were wrong. Love is stronger, hope is stronger, and the dream of a better future is stronger than any weapon. The ceremony ended with the planting of a small tree in the center of the square. It was a rice plant, grown from seeds that had come from the fields where Kim Day used to play. As the tree was planted, General Ryu Da read the words that would be inscribed on the memorial. 8 years old, 8 minutes to justice, 8 billion hearts that will never forget. The Caltharian Empire was finished, not destroyed by conquest but transformed by the power of moral example. The humans had proven that strength did not have to mean cruelty, and that victory did not have to mean domination. But this was only the beginning. 17 star systems were now free, but they needed to learn how to govern themselves. Former enemies had to become partners. Different species with different cultures had to find ways to live together in peace. The hardest work was still ahead. But for the first time in centuries, the galaxy had hope that such work was possible. Kim Day's death had ended an empire. Now his memory would help build something better in its place. 6 months after the fall of the Caltharian Empire, Captain Han Sol stood in what had once been the most feared government building in the galaxy. Now it was the headquarters of the Galactic Reconstruction Council, where representatives from 37 different species worked together to build a better future. The transformation was remarkable. The cold metal walls had been painted with bright colors. The throne room where Caltharian emperors had made their cruel decisions was now a nursery where children of all species played together while their parents attended council meetings. Han Sol had been elected as governor of New Seoul, but he spent most of his time traveling between worlds to help with the reconstruction effort. Today he was on Calthar Prime, visiting the memorial gardens that had been built where Kim Day was executed. The gardens were beautiful. Plants from dozens of worlds grew side by side, creating a living symbol of the peace that the boy's death had made possible. The rice plant that had been planted during the memorial service was now tall and green. its grain almost ready for harvest. But Han Sol was not here just to visit the memorial. He was here to meet with former Caltharian officials who were helping to establish the new government. Commander Vex, who had once defended military bases against human attackers, was now the Minister of Planetary Defense for the reformed Caltharian Republic. His job was to make sure that his world could protect itself without threatening others. "It is still difficult for some of my people," Vex admitted as he walked with Han Sol through the gardens. "We were taught for generations that strength meant domination. Learning to be strong and peaceful at the same time is not easy." "It is not easy for anyone," Han Sol replied. "My own people struggled with anger and the desire for revenge. We had to choose between becoming the monsters we fought against or finding a better way to use our strength." They stopped beside Kim Dae's memorial stone. Fresh flowers had been placed there by visitors from many different worlds. The inscription was now written in 17 languages, but the message was the same in all of them. 8 years old, 8 minutes to justice, 8 billion hearts that will never forget. The reconstruction of galactic civilization was proceeding better than anyone had dared to hope. The Human Accord, signed by all the former Caltharian worlds, established basic principles for interspecies cooperation. No species could be forced to join the new confederation. No world could be conquered or occupied against its will. No government could execute prisoners or harm civilians during conflicts. Most importantly, every species had the right to govern itself according to its own culture and values, as long as those values did not include oppressing others. The results were already visible on dozens of worlds. The Jirani had established a peaceful democracy based on consensus and cooperation. The Vorth had restored their warrior culture, but channeled it toward protecting others instead of conquering them. The Zalani had rebuilt their trade networks and were spreading prosperity throughout the galaxy. Even the Caltharians were finding their place in the new order. Many had embraced the change completely, working alongside former enemies to heal the damage their empire had caused. Others were still struggling with the transition, but they were learning. Dr. Shin A had established the Galactic Technology Institute on the former Caltharian capital world. Scientists from every species worked together to develop new innovations that would improve life for everyone. The same research facilities that had once created weapons of oppression were now producing medical breakthroughs and environmental restoration systems. "We are sharing everything we discover," she explained to visitors from other worlds. "Knowledge belongs to all people, not just to those who happen to discover it first." Engineer Choi Min was leading the infrastructure rebuilding project that connected all the former Caltharian worlds with new communication and transportation networks, but these networks were designed differently from the old imperial systems. The Empire built everything to flow toward the capital, he told his mixed species engineering teams. "We are building systems that connect every world to every other world. No one will be more important than anyone else." The social changes were even more impressive than the technological ones. On New Busan, shopkeeper Beijun had opened a restaurant that served food from 12 different worlds. His customers included human farmers, Jirani miners, Vorth warriors, and even former Caltharian soldiers. "Good food brings people together," he said while serving lunch to a table where 3 different species were sharing stories and laughing together. "When you eat someone's cooking, it is hard to think of them as an enemy." Teacher Im Su had started an exchange program that allowed children from different worlds to visit each other and learn about different cultures. The program was so popular that there was a waiting list years long. "Children do not care about the old hatreds," she observed while watching human and Caltharian children playing together in her school. "They just want to have fun and make friends. If we can keep that spirit alive as they grow up, the future will be much brighter than the past." The memorial projects were particularly important for the healing process. Every world that had suffered under Caltharian rule had built monuments to remember the victims and celebrate the liberation. But these memorials were not designed to promote hatred or revenge. On New Incheon, young Park Min had grown up to become an artist. He created sculptures that showed different species working together to build something beautiful. His most famous work was a statue of children from 6 different worlds holding hands around a tree that grew toward the stars. The Galactic Justice Commission was also doing important work. Former Caltharian officials who had committed crimes were being tried according to the new interspecies legal standards, but the trials were fair and open. with defense lawyers and evidence presented according to proper procedures. Many of the defendants received prison sentences or community service requirements. Some were ordered to pay compensation to their victims, but none were executed, even those who had ordered executions themselves. "We cannot build a better future by repeating the mistakes of the past," explained Chief Justice Yang Mi, a former human military officer who now presided over the commission. Justice means accountability, not revenge. The economic recovery was also remarkable. The Kaltharian Empire had based its economy on forced labor and resource extraction. The new confederation was built on voluntary cooperation and mutual benefit. Trade agreements were negotiated fairly, with all parties receiving reasonable compensation for their goods and services. Worker protection laws ensured that no one could be forced to work in dangerous conditions or for unfair wages. Environmental standards protected the natural resources that belonged to future generations. The results were visible everywhere. Worlds that had been strip-mined under the empire were being restored to their natural beauty. Workers who had been treated as slaves were now earning good wages and learning new skills. Trade that had once flowed only to benefit the imperial capital now created prosperity on every participating world. But perhaps the most important change was in the way people thought about conflict resolution. The old empire had settled disputes through force and intimidation. The new confederation used negotiation and compromise. When disagreements arose between worlds or species, they were brought before mediation councils that included representatives from all affected parties. These councils had the authority to make binding decisions, but they also had the responsibility to find solutions that were fair to everyone involved. Commander Oh Sung had become the director of interspecies relations, a job that required him to travel constantly between worlds to help resolve disputes and negotiate agreements. It was challenging work, but it was also deeply satisfying. "Every problem we solve without violence makes the next problem easier to solve," he told his staff during a training session. "We are teaching the galaxy that there are better ways to handle disagreements than going to war." The military forces of the Confederation were also organized differently from the old imperial system. Each world maintained its own defense forces, but they were trained to work together when necessary. More importantly, they were trained to see their primary mission as protecting civilians rather than conquering territory. General Ryu Da commanded the Confederation Defense Academy, where officers from all member species learned about tactics, strategy, and most importantly, ethics. Every graduate took an oath to protect the innocent and to use force only as a last resort. "A good soldier knows how to win battles," she taught her students. "A great soldier knows when not to fight them." The cultural exchange programs were creating a new generation that thought of diversity as strength rather than as a source of conflict. Young people who grew up speaking multiple languages and understanding different customs were becoming natural diplomats and peacemakers. On New Seoul, the anniversary of Kim Dae's death had become a day of celebration rather than mourning. People from many worlds gathered to remember the boy whose death had changed the galaxy. But they also celebrated the new life that had grown from that tragedy. Park Woo and Lee Na, now grandparents to children of mixed heritage, spoke at the anniversary ceremony. Their words were broadcast to every world in the Confederation.